welcome to the to the Chamber, Medford Jackson County's virtual forum. Today's program is sponsored by Hunter Communications and our season sponsor, which is the Cow Creek Umpqua Band of Tribe of Indians. And I'm David Wright, president of CPM Real Estate Services and Remax Platinum and treasurer of the Chamber Board. And I am your MC for today. This is my first time doing a virtual MC event. And I have to say, I was thinking about it a little earlier, it's going to be a little different. You are not going to be able to hear, I'm not going to be able to see you not laughing at my jokes today. So it's going to be probably not any different than being there, actually. So with us today, we have Carrie Cahill, who is Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Hunter Communications, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. And our keynote speaker is Mr. Mike Orlando, who is the Acting Director for the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. That's an impressive title. And I'm guessing we're not going to get Zoom bombed today while you're on the call. At least I hope not. And then we have our own Brad Hicks, who's President and CEO of the Chamber, who will be closing the program and also moderating the questions from the audience. So welcome to all four of you, or I guess I'm the fourth one, three of you, thank you for coming and being here. I also would like to thank all of our sponsors of the forum. You saw that our names scrolling across your screens before we started the program. We couldn't do this without our forum sponsors. I also special shout out to Hunter Communications and Cow Creek for all the support you've given us over the years. Like I said, we couldn't do it without you, and in these uncertain times, to have that business support is amazing. So thank you. I guess there's some rules to the virtual forum. It's a webinar format, so as you can tell, you're not on the screen, and you don't have video or microphone capabilities. And I think that might have been done on purpose for a few of you, maybe. But actually, it makes it a much smoother, quick forum, so it's a good way to go. There is a little chat or a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you do want to ask a question to Mike, or please shoot those anytime during the program. Brad's going to be getting those, and then also at the end, he'll be asking Mike those questions. So with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person. Hopefully it'll be this decade. But I miss our forums in person, so looking forward to that. And at this time, I'm just going to pass. Is that what you do? You pass the mic over to Carrie virtually? Who's going to introduce?
Yeah, virtually. Thanks. I got it.
There you go.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to extend my gratitude to the Chamber, especially Brad and Lydia, for putting this together and helping us to secure such what I consider a very exciting speaker. While this is the second annual virtual forum for Hunter, we're hoping to be back with you all in person next year. At Hunter, we bring our local hospitals, schools, and businesses the highest speed fiber optic internet and voice services available. You may have heard we are expanding into the residential market as well, and recently we're awarded a nearly $20 million grant from the FCC to bring fiber to more underserved homes in our service territories. If we were all here together in person right now, you would notice we brought fiber to the Rogue Valley Country Club, and we're currently doing construction in this neighborhood as well. While that is all extremely exciting for us, one thing that is always front and center for Hunter is the security of our users and their information and privacy. The more people we connect with faster and faster internet, the more we need to continue to educate people on the threats that exist with the never-ending growth and reach of our internet. That is why I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Mike Orlando. Mike is a senior executive service leader with more than 25 years of law enforcement, intelligence community, and military experience, including counterintelligence and counterterrorism investigations. Mr. Orlando joined the National Counterintelligence and Security Center in November of 2020, serving in the position of Deputy Director. Mr. Orlando recently served as a Deputy Assistant Director in the Counterterrorism Division in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In that capacity, he was responsible for overseeing the business administration and operational support for the division, which included technology development, HR matters, financial management, and private sector partner engagements. Mr. Orlando also served as the acting head of the Counterterrorism Division and successfully managed several interagency crisis incident responses, including the attack at Pensacola Naval Air Station, as well as multiple domestic terrorism attacks here in the United States. I highly encourage all of you to think and write down some questions. Mr. Orlando will be speaking for a shorter time than we're usually accustomed to here at the forum, with the primary purpose being to have an educational and engaging Q&A session. With that, I'd like to proudly introduce and turn it over to Deputy Director Mike Orlando.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome. Very happy to be here and spend some time with you. NCSC has a strong partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and all the chapters. We've done a number of presentations over the years, and you've done a great job of sending out our material. Today, what I'd mostly like to talk to you about is the threat coming from China. But before I do that, I want to highlight some other threats for you, as well as talk a little bit about what the center does. The center, my role, I'm the U.S. government's counterintelligence and security executive. And in that role, we lead and support the U.S. government's counterintelligence and security organizations. We also do a lot of private sector outreach, and we're also responsible for engaging with the public on warnings related to counterintelligence and security threats. As part of those duties, we also have the National Insider Threat Task Force that helps build federal agencies' insider threat programs. And we also have a supply chain risk management directorate that participates in the government's building of supply chain programs. So if you need assistance with your companies in building those types of programs, we can offer that assistance to you as well. So the first threats I'd like to talk and highlight for you first is Russia. Over the next 10 years, we do not see much of a change in our relationship with Russia, regardless of who's leading it. For the most part, Russia would like to remain a superpower and undermine the United States wherever we are, and also continue to cause friction here domestically. In addition to that, you can expect, if you are in the industry of critical infrastructure, that would be transportation, water, gas, oil, Russia will certainly conduct cyber operations against you. And not only Russia, but all of our adversaries do the same level of activity, mostly as a precursor to war, but also as a form of statecraft, that as the US pushes out sanctions against these countries, they at times will use cyber operations against our critical infrastructure to get the US to back down from our position here. So again, if you are in the critical infrastructure business or service, that know that you're at risk from all foreign adversaries. Next, I'd like to highlight both Iran and North Korea. These are regional threats. And over the years, you will continue to see flare-ups between the United States and these countries. And as the US sanctions these countries, what we have seen that North Korea and Iran often mirror those sanctions with cyber attacks in those industries there. And the last thing I like to flag about North Korea, they are financially strapped, and they oftentimes conduct cyber operations to get income. So if you're in the financial industry, you need to be also cautious about that. So China, the US government and many think tanks and outsiders believe China is the greatest threat to the United States in this century, both economically and through national security, that they will challenge us throughout this century. I'd like to flag for you a speech or an article written by General McMaster. It was written in the Atlantic in 2020 about a state visit in 2017 with President Trump and his national security team to China. And throughout the visit, the leadership team in China pretty much emphasized that China was going to really be a superpower. And General McMaster flagged a speech by the Premier of China that if it wasn't really clear to you at that point, China's position with the US, it became abundantly clear of their position, which was in that speech that the Premier was very dismissive of our economic concerns and also of our trade issues. And had said that China had established their industrial base and their technical base. And in the future, they only believe they need us in the United States for agriculture, raw material, and energy, and that China would be the one to supply the world with cutting-edge technology. So what I'd like to flag for you is that you sometimes hear about our relationship talked about as the great powers competition or strategic competition. That's precisely what it is with China. It is a competition, and in competitions, there are winners and losers. There's only one number one, and then there's a number two. And from China's perspective, they have a very neo-mercantile view of things, a winner and a loser. They don't see it as win-win. And so why is that? Many of you may have said, well, we've heard over the years that as China opened up, they would become more like us and open to our industries. Well, what we have seen in 2013 with the rise of Xi Jinping, the president of China, a more authoritarian view of the country, and a view that they will want to be the superpower and they want to be the economic superpower, and they have a plan to do it in a very integrated way. And Xi Jinping has done a very good job of actually outlining it in public what those plans are. And the first one that I'd like to lay out for you is China 2049. This is the centennial of the Chinese Communist Party. And that is the goal for them to be the economic superpower, what they call the Great Rejuvenation. And they have a number of initiatives to help them with this. The first one is called Made in China 2025. This is where China wants to move up the value chain into more high-tech production and development. And they've laid out a blueprint of a number of technologies and areas where they want to develop and produce indigenous products in their country. And so I'd like to review that list with you. And so there's new IT, robotics, aerospace, ocean equipment, rail equipment, energy-saving vehicles, electronic equipment, farming equipment, new materials, biotech. In addition, we see artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5G, autonomous vehicles, and clean energy to be also areas that China is very interested in dominating. And so if you are in these industries, you can rest assured that China will either try to steal those products from you or do joint ventures to legally acquire that technology from you. The second initiative I like to flag for you is called China Standards 2035. This is their goal to dominate as many international standards committees as possible. They've already have leadership on 4 committees in the United Nations, and they also have a number of leadership in international organizations. And from their view, you want to move from being the producers to the developers, but also the people who set the standards so you can benefit as a country. So how are they doing this? Well, China employs a number of legal and illegal ways of doing this. They will first try to outright acquire this technology by buying or merging with a company, or they will try to do a joint venture or do a forced joint venture for those who have to do business in China. And if those programs legally don't work, they will illegally, through cyber penetrations or human operations, acquire that technology. Some of you may say, well, I'm only interested in doing business in a non-military, non-national security way. Well, in China, it is all integrated. They have a very integrated approach, which they call military-civil fusion, in which Xi Jinping has declared that any civilian sector, whatever they do will benefit the military sector, and whatever research or work the military does will benefit the civilian sector for the greater good of the state. And what we have found is that academia, corporations, media, state and local levels in China, that think tanks and associations are all working together for the government. And I would also like to flag for you that if you're dealing with Chinese Chamber of Commerce's, oftentimes they do play a legitimate business role, but oftentimes they are used and integrated by the intelligence services as well. I would also want to point out that this is all codified in China national intelligence laws in 2017 and 2015, in which it's now a law that every citizen in China supports national security, and anyone working in technical industries provide technical support. And so I want to put that in perspective for you. Here in the United States, that if the FBI wants you to cooperate, they have to go to a court and get a court order. And oftentimes you can challenge that order in court if you wanted to. In China, that is not the case. They can compel you to do what they need when they want to do it. So think about, as you hire foreign national employees, that they could be put into a position where they have to cooperate with China. And when you hear Chinese companies saying that they would never cooperate with the government, although they may feel that they don't want to, they have to cooperate with them. And then the last thing I'd flag for you before I move on to an example of all this is China's development of a social credit system. It starts with they're evaluating and collecting information on their own citizens, and based on their behavior will dictate what taxes they pay, whether they get a loan, and what they can do. They've also creating a social credit system for corporations. So if you do business in China, you'll be forced to provide them information about your corporation, and based on that information, we'll decide how high they tax you, who you can do business with, and where you can locate. And lastly, social issues and American ideals. As many of you know, China has imprisoned many Uyghurs in Western China, which counters our views here in the United States. And that will continue to be a challenge here as we move forward. So the example I like to point out for you is the aviation industry in China. the commercial market outlook says that over the next 20 years, there's $3 trillion of business to be had in China. That's 200 more airports, and 8,000 more aircraft that are needed. That's to be split between the American companies and the European companies. But to meet that Made in China 2025 ambition of building indigenously, China has to produce their own airplane. Here comes the COMAC C9-119, which will be certified this year. And in that story, I believe it's back in 2010, 2011, they did a joint venture with GE and a French company to build the engine for that, as well as partnering with 13 other companies to produce this aircraft. And immediately after they went into these joint ventures, COMAC did a joint venture with a state-owned enterprise to build an indigenous engine. And immediately after that, the Chinese government began doing cyber intrusion operations into the joint venture and 13 other companies to acquire technology. And when they couldn't get all that information, they recruited humans in those companies to provide them information and to facilitate the cyber intrusions. So I bring you back to where we are with that, is that now there used to be 2 airplane companies, and now there's 3 who will compete for that $3 trillion. And it's the goal of the Chinese to really push out the American and European companies, and so that China can dominate that market. And so now I like to pivot to solar winds and the supply chain risk management. Although I can't speak to the specifics of solar winds because that is run by the Unified Coordination Group and the recent Microsoft hack, I do want to point out to you that the supply chain operations have been going on for quite some time. In 2020, the US government reported issues with Chinese tax software that companies were mandated to use in China that had malware in it. China has also attacked cloudware. So these things will keep coming, and they will be very difficult to detect. And oftentimes what we're finding, they are targeting software that has high functionality with a large customer base. And it's difficult for integrity checks to find these softwares. So what do we do about it? In the long term, as you're seeing right now, is there needs to start being these private public partnerships to establish a framework to do software integration and integrity checks. But in the short term, what can we do about it? Well, what we're finding is once these malware deploy onto the computer, they need to move laterally. And that's where existing technology can find these things. If you continuously monitor your systems and check your logs, you will be able to find those anomalies rather quickly. And so what we're also finding is that people are not using their administration credentials very well. And we've asked that you close those down and only give out credentials to who needs it. And also to segment your networks to think carefully how they need to be put together. What we're also finding is that there's also poor cyber hygiene throughout the country, both in the government and in the private sector. A couple of weeks ago, a water treatment plant was hacked into. Doesn't believe it was done by a nation state, but they employed poor cyber tradecraft. Last year, NSA had to warn private sector companies about 25 patches that had been around for what I believe has been around 7 years of exploits and vulnerabilities in systems. So companies need to do a better job of downloading patches much quicker. And then lastly, phishing email exploits continue to be popular. Email security training will continue to help you manage risks as we move forward. So to close, what do we do about all this as you put it all together? I would tell you as government, we have to do a better job of sharing information with you sooner and being more informative. But I will tell you in my experience, even when we're able to do that, oftentimes the intelligence picture is very limited. And so with that, we still need to employ other methods. And so what you can do now is what I call doing the basics and doing the basics very well. It starts with top level engagement. As if you're the CEO, security has to be paramount and you need to put it into your culture. Otherwise, no one will follow along with it and you have to educate the workforce. Second, really identify your crown jewels and protect them. Oftentimes I'm reading about companies who have lost technology where employees have been able to load it up to a Dropbox and it's been clear that that technology wasn't properly protected. So spend some time really thinking about what your crown jewels really are and how to protect them. Next, establish an enterprise security program. And if you have one, continue to evaluate it and build upon it. And that program, from my point of view, includes physical security, cybersecurity, an insider threat program, and a supply chain risk management program that are all integrated together and also work with HR, legal, and acquisitions. And what I would say about insider threat, it isn't just about monitoring employees, it's about building a good culture, because employees that are happy often don't commit crimes against their company. And good leadership also helps minimize that cost. And you also need to begin preparing your acquisition people to think about contract and vetting suppliers and understanding where they're getting their information and materials from. And then the last couple of things I like to point out is partnerships. If you do not have an FBI point of contact in your cell phone or your CISA regional point of contact, that's probably the wrong answer. They've been taught to do outreach and partner with you. And even if you don't want to provide them information, you should be calling them. They want to call you and talk to you, and you have to have those relationships. If you're calling them in a time of emergency, it's probably too late. And then last, collaborate within your sector. In my example, I don't begrudge European American companies for trying to get that $3 trillion. But if they could partner together, how to block out China from stealing their technology and laying those rules of the road, it will be helpful. And last, if you have to do business in China, take everything I've taken and come up with a plan about how do you go and operate safely and securely. So with that, I open it up to your questions.
Okay, Mike, first of all, let me just say thank you as always. And also, as always, these briefings tend to scare the you-know-what out of people. I remember the first time listening to one, sitting in an audience of 100 chamber CEOs, and it took about 2 minutes for people to shake loose and formulate some questions. But it's very critical that you bring this information to us. So thank you very much. Now, and I see questions popping in here. So give me just a moment. Okay, Mike, what are the odds that we allow Chinese EV automakers to enter our market?
Well, I think what we're starting to see now that government and private sector realize that it is a competition with China and that we need to invest here to remain the leaders. But to the specifics of that question, I do think it's possible that EV, unless we determine that there's a national security risk to it, that they will be able to enter the market here if possible. But I do want to point out that it's China's goal really first to really take care of indigenally, making sure that they push out Tesla and others so that they can supply China with their own technology and then push out to other parts of the world.
Okay, so I'm going to interject here, and I see a couple more questions popping in. Just so people know, if your name is associated with your question, I assume that it's okay for me to mention your name or your company's name, so I'll do that. If it's anonymous, of course, that's obvious. And keep in mind, even if it's anonymous, Mike will know who you are and he'll triangulate your coordinates immediately. So he's going to find you either way. But you alluded to it, and maybe the last question was related to this as well. Can you talk just a moment about the cost of intellectual property theft, and maybe not in real dollars, but on the impact to American businesses, and some instances where we've seen American companies create something or invent something, take so long to get through the regulatory process that by the time they do, the product's been stolen, essentially.
Yeah,
the idea.
Great question. So the estimates that I've heard is that in economic espionage is that we're averaging about 200 billion to 600 billion a year in loss. All right, and then think about that. That's been going on for 20 years. And based on some of the research that I have done, publicly disclosed, there's probably about 120 economic espionage cases over the last 20 years. And if you add in export violations, that number goes up over 200. And then publicly, the numbers estimate well over 1,000 civil litigations related to economic espionage, all tied to China. So the trends over the 20 years continue to grow and continue to paint a picture of China trying to steal technology. You've asked about specific cases. There have been so many of them, so many companies that have been affected. Motorola has lost technology. DuPont, some of the dyes they have lost. Seeds, agriculture seeds have been stolen. Chinese have come here and actually dug seeds out of the ground. I think also in the solar panel industry, as well as wind turbines, aviation. I mean, every industry has been really affected by this. There's one company that I cannot remember that I know pretty much put them out of business. But if I can think about that one, I'll certainly get it back to you. But the bottom line is they're attacking all sectors, not just military sectors, but everything in the private sector that's cutting edge and in technology. And if you look at that blueprint, and if you're in that blueprint of China, Made in China 2025, they're certainly going to take technology. And in the news, you're seeing a lot about semiconductors as we're fighting about that. And the more we restrict China from having that, I promise you they will ramp up their cyber and human contact to really steal that technology from us.
Thanks, Mike. This next question is from Barbara Acosta Hong at Hunter Fiber. The Chinese government is currently offering millions of dollars in land, building, and equipment to U.S. biotech companies to open facilities there. Is the U.S. government monitoring or consulting, excuse me, with these companies who've taken advantage of these offers to protect our interests?
So this is very concerning to us. And this year, the areas that we're trying to really get out to, AI, quantum, 5G, clean energy, and biotech is another area that's very concerned. The previous director had done a series on 60 Minutes about biotech, about how China is really trying to take our DNA for a variety of purposes. And what we're finding is really that is just the tip of the iceberg, and that the healthcare industry really doesn't completely understand all the threats, and when therefore we don't understand all the threats. And what we're seeing with this is very similar to what we've seen in the 1,000 Talents program, in which China has gone out and used that program to recruit Americans, Chinese Americans, anyone who will come and help set them up in China and bring technology with them. The concerning part about the 1,000 Talents program is that that is one of at least 200 programs that we are aware of. And so we're trying to really get the message out to educate people about if you're taking advantage of these land and building deals, they're certainly doing it to steal your technology and steal what you have.
Thank you. Mike, next question from Alan Smith. How concerned are you about large Chinese drone companies like DJI that are used for aerial mapping in the United States? Can these drones be used to send mapping information back to China?
We are very concerned about drones and DJI for a variety of reasons, from all sorts of surveillance issues. And so that is another issue that we have looked at in the past and will continue to monitor moving forward.
Okay, this question from Kathy Kemper-Pell. Are Chinese activities being funded by ransomware attacks, and how do we protect our data? And you kind of touched on some of that.
So the North Koreans are mostly the ones who do ransomware attacks that's tied to the nation state. I don't believe we've seen the Chinese use that. Now, Chinese criminals may be using it, but for the most part, the Chinese are pretty much focused on collecting intelligence about our government and stealing IP.
Next question from Lee Milligan. In general, we have historically taken a defensive posture against external attacks from bad actors. Have we considered taking an offensive approach to shut down or respond to malware and other attacks as a deterrent to future attempts?
Yeah, a great question. When you get into the cyberspace, there's many considerations, particularly with nation states. It's a different problem set than a terrorist problem. And so oftentimes the interagency team gets together and looks at different options about how to go about this. And sometimes it's sanctions, and sometimes it's cyber operations that you don't hear about in the public.
This question is from David Kennington. We hear week after week, and this is sort of related to a previous question. And I'm just so the listeners know two things. One, if questions are similar, I may consolidate them into one question. And then I guess the other thing to know is this is not a Facebook page, so I won't be reading or repeating random statements and comments. But I'm going to go ahead and read this one just in case it's nuanced. We hear week after week about organizations getting hit by ransomware. Do you see ransomware continuing to be an issue? And if so, what's the government doing to reduce the prevalence of this particular problem?
Yeah, I agree. Ransomware is a problem, but it gets back to my earlier statements about cyber hygiene. We need to do a better job. There is a document out by NIST about how to do cybersecurity, and we're finding both government and the private sector aren't really doing the basics. But I would also say that the government now, because of SolarWinds and the number of cyber hacks, are really trying to consolidate the government response and the private sector so we could do more to defend against these type of attacks, to include ransomware, and also to think about how do we set new norms internationally to reduce this type of activity.
This question comes from Michael. I hope I pronounce this correctly. Winshink. Based on the time frames you have laid out, it would appear there may be validity to a view that COVID was a beta test with more significant virus created and released across the world originating from China. How close to reality is that, and how possible that would be going in the future, I think, going forward as a disruption strategy?
Well, all we can say about COVID is, at a minimum, China did not reveal the extent of the problem there, and then eventually turned into a pandemic, and has caused really all the death and then the economic challenges that we have today. What concerns me the most is, where is the international community against China on this? And it shows how hard this problem is with China, because so many people are tied to the economy of China that they're afraid to talk out against China in anything in a bad way. I certainly can't speak to anything about more than that regarding COVID in China, though.
Again, I'm going to jump in here, Mike. One of the things you said I really appreciated, for all the folks who have thought that either I or our IT company, Helix, has exaggerated this over the years. At our chamber specifically, we've noticed, and we've been told by our IT company, we have as many or more hack attempts on the chamber as our IT company does on all their other clients. And I've always assumed that had something to do with the perception, even though there's a dramatic difference. Chambers of commerce in China play a certain role and are used as a tool in certain ways that chambers, obviously, in America are not. You think there's any logic to what I just said? I mean, they assume we're holding the same sort of trade secrets that they do at Chinese chambers, even though we don't.
Yeah, and there may be the assumption that instead of having to target individual companies, if they just target the chamber may hold more information or consolidate that information, which may be why they target you. So an example, similar but different, is EPA. EPA holds a lot of information about car makers and clean energy. And so instead of targeting Ford and Chevy, they could just target EPA to try to get all that data in one spot.
Gotcha. This question just comes from Scott. So to all the Scotts out there in the world, businesses do not see cyber as a threat, just a cost. Will government be mandating controls, providing funding to encourage adoption of a better stance on this, PCI, HIPAA, et cetera?
Yeah, that's. I think he made some great points there. Every time I get out and talk to people in industry, I do hear that, hey, this is very expensive to do this. Some companies can't afford to do it. And so I think there's going to have to be some more government executive orders and policies, but also at the same time, we've got to make this more affordable so people can do it, so we can protect ourselves. Because oftentimes when I talk about critical infrastructure, it's owned by the private sector. It's not owned by the government, but it impacts us. So we better start figuring out ways to help the private sector out with some of this.
I want to make sure, it looks like we're doing well on time, and I really appreciate all the good questions here. I will say this really quickly. We've also gotten a lot of requests for links to the recorded program when we're done here today. And assuming that technology didn't betray us or there was some cyber attack, we should be able to do that. So to everybody that inquired about that, we are typically able to do that. So at some point soon, look for a link back to the program, which means, Mike, you're doing a great job. People want to circle back and probably share this with other folks. Thinking back, Mike, to any of the specific questions, does that prompt anything else that you wanted to add before I jump in any other questions?
No, I just, if you don't have a chance to ask a question or you have a larger question, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or us here. I mean, we're here to help you and help problem solve with you or point you in the right directions. As I talked about partners, if you don't have a contact at FBI or CISA or NSA, I'm happy to help connect you with those right partners, no matter where you are.
That's great. And that's something that we can distribute out to our members through our business review, our monthly newsletter, or something like that. So thank you for that. This comes from Partnered Solutions IT. When it comes to our power grid, which was largely built, and I added that, but largely built in the 1940s and 50s, and built with a 50-year expiration date, do you have any information on large-scale development plans and building greater security into that system?
I don't have any specific information about that, but I can tell you critical infrastructure is a major concern of the intelligence community. There are a number of working groups trying to analyze this problem and figure out what we need to do to protect them and to how do we work better with private sector so we can have a combined solution so we can have a secure network.
So again, I'm taking real liberties with the opportunity to ask questions and add some thoughts, but what are some really good, I mean, this is all the scary stuff, and I'm sure we'll go back to scary stuff in a minute, but what are some of the good things that we're doing right now that could give us hope that we're moving in the right direction, protecting ourselves?
So, I mean, the good news is, we're talking about this problem where, I've worked this issue for, we've talked a lot about my counterterrorism background, but prior to that, I worked Chinese counterintelligence the majority of my career. And for the longest time, we never were able to talk about these things. And now we're talking about things and we've got people thinking about it. And despite laying out China's plans, there's many economists and as well as think takers who question, will they be able to pull this off? I mean, they have their own challenges as well. And I also look at an authoritarian regime. How long can they keep the pressure on the Chinese people to do these things when we are a free society that's allowed to innovate? And I do think, if in the next 10 years, if we continue to collaborate together and problem solve and invest in the sciences and take some measures, we will probably be in a better position than we are today. So I do think there is promise, but we have to stay at it. If we continue to think short-term about the short-term gains, then I think we're going to have a hard time moving forward.
So to that end, what can organizations like local chambers around the country do to be a partner to you? What can we do to assist, and what can we do to continue to better educate, beyond programs like this, better educate our members at the local level?
Yeah. So I would say continuing the partnership, that when the FBI, CISA, NSA, or any government wants to partner with you, to be open to that partnership. You don't have to give them your information, but that partnerships help us really come up with the better answers. And then when you're thinking about doing things, maybe with China, you can often talk to us so we can help problem solve with you how to go about that in the most effective ways versus just going off and doing it and saying it's too much of a cost. So I would say the partnership piece is really what we need to get better at. And not just you, the government has to figure out how to do it well together with you guys. I think there's a lot of growth areas where I've heard stories of us trying to reach out, but not in the right sort of way or not providing enough information. And that's one of the things that I've tried to convey to my partners in government, that we've really got to have partnerships, and how we fix our partnerships and grow our partnerships has to continue to be part of what we do moving forward.
Are there, ironically, as I was asking that, another question on the same train of thought came in, but any specific programs that are currently active or actions that some small businesses, our small business members could adopt right now?
So I would say NSA is rolling out a new cooperative program. The FBI has started a new cyber task force. And I would also say here at the center, we oftentimes push out products. And if you can take our products and push them out, those are good starting points. And then if you're just lost, you can come to us and we'll certainly push you in the right direction.
That sounds good. I appreciate that. And those links and those programs would be great for us to be able to share with our members. So we'll research that and get prepared to do that too. I'm looking. Let's see here. Okay. Next question comes from Kira. Considering the fires that came through our county, a lot of people have lost their documentation and need to go and are looking at things like virtual storage. What's the best way to keep client and business information safe in this online world based on everything you just said? Do you have some suggestions for where to keep that kind of documentation virtually filed safely?
Yeah, first, I'm very sorry for the loss that you guys have sustained out there. But I think this is an excellent question. What do you do? One of the things we preach is that cloud, storage isn't necessarily secure. And I've told you to identify your crown jewels. And I wouldn't put my crown jewels into someone else's hands. And so I think you have to look at your material and determine what is really of value. And if it's not that valuable, but you have to maintain it, then it's probably okay putting it into a cloud somewhere. But other than that, you probably need to make backups and store them in separate locations so that if you have another disaster, you do have systems that are redundant.
Thank you. How do you differ? This is from Carrie at Hunter. How do you differentiate between someone like I'm going to butcher this. Is it Huawei?
Oh, Huawei.
Yeah,
Huawei.
That's what I thought. I figured I was going to mispronounce it. And Cisco. Cisco's an American company, but all their equipment is manufactured in China. So how can we be sure that their equipment isn't compromised in the same way as it was with Huawei?
So Huawei.
Huawei, okay.
Yeah, Huawei is designed and produced in China. And our concern with that is a Chinese indigenous system, a backbone, which the Chinese government can put backdoors in for surveillance purposes and other things. Cisco, if they are being produced in China, is designed and examined here in America. So we feel fairly confident that American products that are designed but may be produced in China are probably to a higher standard and more secure, and we'd have more control of those systems versus a Huawei product, which is indigenous to China.
Mike, this question comes from Deborah Amin. How do you work with the National Institute for Standards and Technology and the Baldrige cybersecurity assessment tool?
So here in the center, we generally don't work in the cyber arena at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. There's actually a cyber executive that we partner with that manages all the cyber relationships for us. And I would imagine NSA, FBI, and CISA, who are really the three agencies that work in the cyber arena, are partnering with them. Our role here in the center is really to integrate the CI security people, but then do the outreach. Oftentimes, we talk about cyber because it is part of the counterintelligence problem.
Very good. Let me just take a quick peek and make sure I'm getting questions coming in the Q&A box, in the chat box, and on my phone via chat. So you're getting peppered. You're doing a great job in the lightning round here. Let me see here. Where did that go? Okay, so just as an average citizen, not a business owner, what kind of precautions do individuals need to take with any of their home computers or cell phones, iPads, et cetera, the individual devices that we all tote around?
Yeah. So another good question is, even though you're a private citizen and you may feel that you're not part of any private sector or industry of value, oftentimes what we do see is nation states adversary using your system as hot points to conduct attacks on other systems. So when you read an article about Microsoft came in and they used an IP in the United States to conceal their activity, it might have been your router that they hacked to launch from. So it's important that you keep your router updated and your computer updated and patched, and that you use antivirus and you use strong passwords.
So I think last but not least, let me just double check all three of my buckets here. And it seems like some questions are coming in the middle of this thread as opposed to the bottom. Okay. It looks like I got them all. If I didn't, I apologize, but great questions, great answers. And last but not least, particularly for those of us who have teenagers at home, talk about TikTok.
So I have 2 teenagers, and it's a conversation several times, and my kids have threatened to leave if TikTok wasn't being allowed to use. So the concern with TikTok is really twofold as I see it. So China really does want to control the narrative and do censorship. And on TikTok, that platform will enable them to do that. And I do believe the FBI had a case a few months ago in which, that was Zoom, in which I think, was it Zoom? Yeah, I think it was Zoom. But in any case, there are instances where TikTok has censored some things. And so we really don't want the Chinese government really dictating material here. But the other thing that is of concern is that China is trying to collect a lot of data and be leaders in AI. And part of that, they are, I believe, the leaders in facial recognition at this point, if I understand correctly, or pretty close to it. And in TikTok, you make videos where your face is there. And so now they're capturing all this information. And so if you look at all the data that has been taken from the OPM hack, your DNA, United Airlines, and now they have your face from TikTok, we're enabling them to have all this data. And to have strong AI, you have to have data analysis. And so we're feeding into the system. And so that's kind of the bigger concerns with TikTok.
So again, just to send a little shiver down everybody's spines, talk for just a moment about products like Ancestry, 23andMe, all the DNA that we're sending somewhere.
Yeah, so we are sending a lot of our DNA to China for genetic sequencing. And as part of that, they're able to learn a lot about your health and your relatives' health. And that problem is twofold. And so if you're someone that they want to recruit or target for GE, right? They now know a lot about your health. And if you have a health issue, they may try to use that against you. But broadly, a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't apply to me, so why do I care? Well, back to biotech. They are collecting all this data, which will help them be leaders in biotechnology and precision medicine. And if the U.S. wants to remain having the lead in that, we shouldn't be sending our DNA over to China.
So with that, let me just make sure I've cleaned out the box here. I have. Mike, again, great questions from our members, great answers. Any closing thoughts that you have before I wrap it up?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a good time, and I appreciate your questions. They're very informative to me. And please reach out to me or anyone else. We're happy to help you. That's our job here.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I know the bad actors don't take a day off, so your time is both valuable and appreciated. Thank you very much. Also, thank you to Hunter and Cow Creek, our sponsors, and all the individual sponsors as well. Now give me just a few moments, and I'm going to go through some housekeeping stuff. Let's see here. what do I have on my list today? So on Tuesday, March 30th, you're going to want to tune into our employment law seminar. We're actually partnering with chambers around the region on this one. We've done those individually. Our sponsor is BVSI, and I believe we are partnering with the Klamath Falls Chamber, the Grants Pass Chamber, maybe the Ashland Chamber. So tune in for that, because the topic that will be covered is the top policy considerations for Southern Oregon employers in 2021. And I think you all know the legislature is in session right now. So those things will be coming at us all fast and furious. You'll probably notice that Lydia just put up to your questions about resources and places you can go. Lydia just put up a resource slide from NCSC that you can use to follow those links and check out their social media sites, etc. So thanks, Lydia, for doing that. Going back to our employment law series, I just want to also add a couple things that we are getting a lot of questions about at the Chamber are going to be covered in this session. For example, bringing employees back to the workplace, appropriate ways to structure telework accommodations, vaccinations, and employee handbook updates that you'll need for this year to come. You can go to medfordchamber.com, scroll down to featured news and events, and find the links there. Really quickly, also, I just want to make sure you know I won't go into details about individual bills, other than maybe one or two, but our legislative action team is working very actively during this legislative session, paying attention to all the issues that are both good and detrimental to your business. One of them we've been focused on recently has been this fairly outrageous beer, wine, and spirits tax, which the Chamber Board is opposing. It represented or represents, if passed, somewhere between a 2,000 and 3,000% increase on one of the most hard-hit industries in our state. So we think we've got a fighting chance to keep that from passing. It's looking good, but I just want to let you know our legislative action team is working very actively on a whole variety of issues. Our chamber lobbyist, John Watt, and chair of our legislative action team, Travis Snyder, and a whole bunch of other folks. So stay tuned to more news on that. The other thing is we near the last half of our forum season and looking forward to future programs, both the remainder of this season, there are only a few left, and next season. As David Wright mentioned earlier, we'll be looking for both forum sponsorship renewals. And thank you so very much to all of you who've continued to support this now about 101-year-old institution, tradition in our community. Forum has existed in many ways, and this is the latest. We're not sure it's the greatest, but it's the latest, and we want to say thanks for your participation and your sponsorship. Lydia will be getting information out to all of you, but we'd also like to know if you have ways you think we can improve this virtual programming moving forward. That way, if this is the way it is for a while, we want to deliver you the best product possible. So send those emails to Lydia, Lydia, at medfordchamber.com and share your feedback. With that, we are going to draw this program to a close. I look forward to seeing you all next month here on Monday, April 12th for the Providence Health Providence Health and Services sponsored program on COVID-19 research and development in the state of Oregon. Thanks so much for being here. Mike, thank you. Thanks to our sponsors. Have a great day and a great week, and we'll see you next month.